I guess everyone can hear me. I'm Sari Mojtabai, and I'm the Executive Director of the Public Affairs Alliance of Iranian Americans. And we're very glad that you're here for our very first inaugural public policy panel presentation. For those of you who don't know much about PAAIA, we are a nonprofit organization that serves the domestic interests of the Iranian American community in the United States. And part of our mission is to enhance the image and strengthen the voice of the Iranian Americans as well as our community. But we also, one of the things that we're very passionate about is to make sure that we're aggregating and providing information, accurate information about our community and what our needs and issues are. And we've used that information to not only educate policymakers and legislators and lawmakers about what our needs are, but also to educate our own community about how they can get involved and impact in a very meaningful way the policy decisions that are being made. So one of the ways in which we do that, and you'll hear more about it through the panel presentation, is that we conduct annual surveys of the Iranian American community. And these are very unique, one-of-a-kind surveys. They're not done by any other organization. And what they do is that they try to pull accurate demographic and attitudinal information about the Iranian American community. And we've used these surveys to educate lawmakers and policymakers and do briefings at the State Department, administration, with congressmen and women, as well as congressional officers and staff members. And there are copies of them outside, of the two most recent ones outside, so you're more than welcome to take some. But one of the things that we found out from these surveys, what really affirmed it for us, was that these kinds of discussions and dialogue that we're going to have today are very important. And I'm very thankful to the gentlemen here, Dr. Katzman, Alireza, Nader, and Alex Vatanka for being here. Gentlemen, thank you very much for taking time out of your busy day. And so I'm going to hand it over to our moderator, Amir Bagherpour, who's given me a time limit of, I think, under 1 minute. Was that it? And for those of you who may not know Amir, Amir is the Director of Research and Analysis at PAAIA. He is also the first Iranian American graduate from West Point, and he has served as an armored officer for the U.S. Army. So we're very proud of him, obviously. And he is going to have a book coming out, and I want all of you to write the name down so that when it comes, you can go and purchase it and, you know, make sure that he gets some money out of it, that he can then donate to PAAIA, obviously. The book is going to be called The Coming Storm, The Evolution of Instability in the Middle East. Very exciting reading. Anyway, thank you very much for being here, and Amir John, you can take over.
Thank you, Sari, for the kind introduction. Thank you, everybody, for coming to this inaugural public policy panel with PAAIA today. Our guest today, to my left, is Dr. Ken Katzman. Dr. Katzman specializes in Middle Eastern affairs at the Congressional Research Service with a special emphasis on Iran and Iraq. In this role, Dr. Katzman analyzes U.S. policy and legislation on the Persian Gulf region for members of Congress and their legislative staff. He has numerous publications and articles, including a book entitled The Warriors of Islam, Iran's Revolutionary Guard. Dr. Katzman has appeared on numerous media outlets, including CNN, NBC, Nightly News, and NewsHour with Jim Lehrer. Dr. Katzman, we are happy to have you on this panel. To my right, we have Alireza Nader. Alireza is a senior international policy analyst at the RAND Corporation. He's the lead author of his most recent publication, Coping with a Nuclearizing Iran. He also has many other publications at the RAND Corporation, has written articles for several media outlets. His focus is on Iran's political dynamics and Iranian foreign policy. Prior to joining RAND, Alireza served as a research analyst at the Center for Naval Analysis. Alireza, thank you for being with us. And then to my far right, we have Alex Vatanka. Alex is currently a senior fellow at the U.S. Air Force Special Operations School and a senior fellow at the Middle East Institute. Prior to that, he was the managing editor of Jane's Islamic Affairs Analyst in Washington. And previous to that, he was a senior political analyst in London for Jane's covering the Middle East. His most recent publication is The Artesh, Iran's Marginalized Regular Army. He's written for numerous media outlets such as the Christian Science Monitor, Al Jazeera, and Journal of International Security Affairs. He frequently appears on television as well. Alex, we're pleased to have you.
Thank you.
So today's panel is a relatively broad topic, assessing U.S. policy on Iran. So let me just place it in context. For more than 30 years, the United States has been locked in an impasse with the Islamic Republic of Iran, a policy of really neither war nor peace. And there's been successful instances where rapprochement seemed possible, but so far there's been no success. In spite of these in spite of the fact that there's been no rapprochement, every single president since Carter has made some effort on various levels to open a dialogue and address the issue with Iran. However, it's been unsuccessful so far. So now, what do we see today? The Islamic Republic of Iran continues to resist halting enrichment of uranium, consisting of a tough sanctions policy compared with diplomatic efforts. Because of Tehran's refusal to be transparent with its nuclear program, we now see the toughest sanctions policy imposed on Iran in the history of the Islamic Republic. Now, the White House feels that these tough sanctions are what brought Iran to the negotiating table. And so we're about to enter the second round of P5+1 negotiations in this iteration of the nuclear crisis. These talks are taking place in Baghdad coming up this month, and it's a follow-up from the Istanbul talks last month. In the meanwhile, Iran's oil output has reached the lowest level in over 20 years based on the impact of these sanctions. And just recently, an advisor to Ayatollah Khamenei has stated that in order for the Baghdad talks to be successful, there should be a lifting of sanctions. So this is the broad context that we're going to talk about. I'd like to open up with the first question, and it's a big question. And we could start with Dr. Katzman first, and follow up with Alireza and Alex. What does the United States see Iran's current role in the region? And what would the United States and many of Iran's neighbors like to see from Iran?
Well, thank you. I'll just make some brief comments on that. I think it seems to me that the era where the U.S. was very worried about Iranian support of terrorism has declined. I think that's less of a factor in the relationship now. Let me explain why I think that is. In the 80s and 90s, when Hezbollah, particularly Hamas, they were very active with suicide bombings and hijackings and hostage taking. But now these two factions have sort of morphed, they've evolved. They're more concentrated on the politics of the countries and entities where they exist. Hezbollah is now a political movement mainly. It wants a large share of power in Lebanon. It has not really done any discernible or verifiable acts of terrorism in recent years, and it's focusing more on its political role in Lebanon. Now, of course, it has a very large stockpile of rockets. There was a war with Israel 2006. We know that, but still, it's not the same as this was in the 1980s, particularly when the hostages were in Lebanon, things like that. So there's that. Hamas obviously has merged a little more into Palestinian politics and is, we're not seeing the same level of suicide attacks in Israel. Al-Qaeda, there have been some Al-Qaeda people in Iran, but they may be transiting or they may be under some house arrest. It's not like Iran is as a state supporting Al-Qaeda, although some in this town have alleged that. I don't happen to agree with it, but I don't see any systematic Iranian support for Al-Qaeda. The Taliban in Afghanistan, we were just talking about, there's been maybe some tactical support to certain Taliban factions in Afghanistan, but it's not a major factor on the Afghan battlefield. few years ago, there was a great worry about Iranian support to the Muqtada Sadr in Iraq. Now the U.S. is out of Iraq, so that's less of a factor. Again, are we off the record, or where are we on this? Is this on the record, off the record?
This is on the record.
It's on the record, okay, well, better be careful here. Some are talking a lot about Iran's influence in Latin America, particularly Venezuela. I don't see a huge trend there. Yes, Ahmadinejad visits. He's forged a relationship with Mr. Chavez to maybe criticize the United States and to maybe try to break out of sanctions or weaken sanctions in some way. But I don't see Iran as a huge factor in Latin America where it's threatening U.S. interests that much. So this, what I'm saying is, I think Iran is I think 10 years ago, 15 years ago, there was the view of Iran definitely, or even when we were in trouble in Iraq, I would say, the view of Iran on the march, Iran supporting Shia opposition movements, Iran as a huge potential hegemon in the region. And I think that really has lessened. So I think the main issue between the U.S. and Iran is right now, I would say, the nuclear issue. Human rights issues too, but in terms of security, I would say it's the nuclear issue.
Alireza?
How long would you like me to speak for?
5-10 minutes.
Okay. I think, good morning. Thanks to PAAIA for inviting me to speak. I think you hit on a key question, Amir, and that is whether the United States wants to change Iran's behavior, or is the United States interested in regime change in Iran? And in order to answer that, I'll start with the nuclear program, because that's a central focus in U.S.-Iranian relations. That's the key issue with the Iranian regime, that it is allegedly pursuing a nuclear weapons program. Recently, as you know, sanctions against Iran have been greatly strengthened. We've had new sanctions against the central bank in Iran. The European Union plans to embargo Iran's oil in July, which would be a significant setback for Iran. Iran's exports have dropped significantly, some estimate by a third. And once the European oil embargo goes into effect, its ability to export oil will be greatly impacted. Other countries like Japan, South Korea, major Iranian oil buyers are also decreasing, even China decreasing purchase of Iranian oil. And this has had a very noticeable impact in Iran. Prices have gone up. The population has lost confidence in the government's economic programs and abilities. Not that it had much confidence before, but that has even declined since the new sanctions. Price of goods have gone up. We can talk on and on about the effects of sanctions on the Iranian population. But sanctions have also applied real pressure against the regime. We're at a point where the Iranian regime is worried about the economic consequences of its nuclear policy. And this puts the regime in a sensitive position regarding negotiations with the United States. We just had Iran engage the P5+1 in Istanbul, and subsequent meetings are supposed to take place in Baghdad 3 weeks from now. And that will be a critical test of Iran's willingness to negotiate with the United States. So the key question is whether the Islamic Republic really wants to negotiate with the United States, wants to compromise on the nuclear program and a number of other issues, and whether it's really capable of compromising. I think there's some positive signs that the regime could be serious about negotiations at this point. Ayatollah Khamenei, the supreme leader, a month ago praised President Obama from not pursuing the military option, of basically, as Khamenei characterized it, stepping back from war. There have been a number of other Iranian figures who've been very positive regarding nuclear negotiations, like Ayatollah Janati, the head of the Guardian Council, very anti-American conservative figures within Iran's establishment. And there's been speculation that they're readying the Iranian public, for some sort of deal with the United States. And potentially, we can discuss the mechanics of it and the details later on. But Iran is enriching uranium up to 20%. It claims for civilian purposes. However, that 20% can be used to enrich uranium to bomb-grade material. And this is what we're really worried about, that Iran is enriching uranium to use it for nuclear weapons. So if Iran agrees at this point in May, if it shows a willingness to ship out the 20% enriched uranium outside of Iran, that will be viewed as a confidence-building measure. So there's, I think, a slight hope for optimism, and I want to emphasize slight, because there are a number of other issues at play. It's the U.S. Concerns with Iran are not just about the nuclear program. I think when we look at the nuclear program, we have to look at the framework of the U.S.-Iranian strategic rivalry. In Iran, we have a political system that is ideologically rooted. It's led by Khamenei. And when you look at Khamenei and listen to his speeches, he's very consistent about his views on the United States. He stated that the United States is not just interested in solving the nuclear program. It is opposed to the essence of the Islamic Republic. Khamenei has stated that the United States is after excuses. The nuclear program is just an excuse to come after the Islamic Republic. He's specifically called the United States Bahane-ju, looking for excuses, basically. And so Khamenei and most of the Iranian political establishment view the United States as trying to undermine the regime, as trying to overthrow it in the long term. And there's a real strategic rivalry between Iran and the United States that is heating up day by day. There's competition over influence and power in the Persian Gulf, in Syria, in Iraq, in the Levant, in Lebanon. And the Arab uprisings have heightened the sense of competition between the two countries. So as we go into nuclear negotiations, yes, the regime is under a great deal of pressure. It has to find a way out, buy itself time, avoid the European oil embargo. But at the same time, the regime is not capable of seeking full rapprochement with the United States because it sees the United States as an enemy, as an eternal enemy. And when you consider the regime's core interests, I think negotiations, even on the nuclear program, become very difficult. Because let's say we reach a deal on uranium enrichment in Baghdad 3 weeks from now. It's hard to see Iran pursuing other steps to fully convince the international community that is not after nuclear weapons capability. And those steps would be to open up some of its suspected military sites like PAAIA, to allow fuller inspections, to sign the NPT additional protocol. And having all of this, the regime, including Khamenei, specifically Khamenei, has to justify why he's making a compromise and stepping back. Given the regime's vulnerability at home, given its lack of legitimacy among the Iranian population, I think this would be very difficult to do. So within 3 weeks, we should look for signs of compromise, but I think the key question remains whether the regime is really serious about reaching a negotiated settlement, or is it just trying to buy time? Thanks.
Well, thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Thank you to PAAIA for the kind invitation. Coming as the third person, all the good things have already been said, but I'll try and see if I can add anything to it. Pretty much agree with everything that Ken and Ali have been saying. I'll just put a few caveats, if I could. On the point of U.S. being less concerned about Iranian-supported terrorism that Ken mentioned, I agree. I fully agree with that. But the big question mark in my mind is, what about next week or next month? Because what's happening in the region is so much, we have so many different moving parts. So you could find yourself, today, Iran-Hamas relations are not good. Hezbollah is part of the government in Beirut, fine. But what happens next month? Because, and this is the key argument that I would put out there for everybody to consider, if you look at sources of Iranian power, and you can look at 33 years, there's one thing that stands out, and it's their ability to fill vacuums. Iran doesn't generate opportunities as it's good at getting into a vacuum and becoming a benefactor of somebody that's looking for somebody to support it financially and politically and so forth. It's been true for Hezbollah, it's been true for Islamic Jihad, Hamas, and other groups that potentially might come up. So in a region where so much is happening at the same time, as quick as it's going on, look for the Iranians not creating opportunities, but basically taking advantage and benefiting from somebody else messing up. Egypt could be the big prize for the Iranians. So we should all keep an eye on what happens in Egypt. On the issue of the nuclear program, to some extent, I'm not sure if I got to be friendly here. So Ken says the nuclear issue is not is the key issue, and Ali says it's not. Roughly, is that how I heard it?
Well, no, it is a key issue, but it's within the framework of the rivalry between the United States and Iran.
I think in the short term, the nuclear issue is what's at stake. But everything changes again when we're looking ahead in the medium to long term. Again, the nuclear issue has just been an additional layer, this complicated relations between U.S. and Iran, only from 2002 onwards, to 10 years. So if you look at 79 to 2002, what was keeping these two countries apart then? So it's more complicated than a nuclear issue. And I think it takes us to the core, heart of the matter in Washington. What's the end objective? And I would put my neck out and say the United States doesn't know what the end objective is vis-a-vis Iran, the Islamic Republic. Is it regime change or change in regime's behavior? And the thing that obviously complicates matters for the United States is that it's not just a policy vis-a-vis Iran. The United States has a host of allies, particularly in the Persian Gulf, that it has to consider, their interests, their fears. So when President Ahmadinejad shows up unannounced in Abu Musa Island, then Americans sending F-22s to UAE, it's a reaction to their worries about, okay, what do we do to at least hang on to what we have? Never mind what we would like to see with the Iranians, what do we have? How do we secure our alliances that we have? Because, and I was recently in the Gulf, and I heard it from UAE to Bahrain, elsewhere, there is a deep fear that the United States is about to turn the corner, reach a deal with the Iranians, and let the GCC states suffer the consequences. And again, these are the kind of regional dynamics that are at play by U.S. allies, and the American administration, be it a Democrat or Republican, has to take those into account, as opposed to saying, you know what, we can ignore these smaller neighbors of Iran, we'll just deal with Iran. How do we solve the Iranian issue? And when you look at it like that, then regime change has to be perceived very differently and beyond just a simple question of the nuclear issue. Very quickly, just a point that my good friend Ali here mentioned, the United States is an eternal enemy of the Islamic Republic. I was only 10 when I left the Islamic Republic, but it was enough for me to see that there's a bunch of people that are pretty flexible. Now, flexible doesn't mean it's positive. You can go and say, well, flexible means pragmatic, which is positive, or opportunistic, which is negative, charlatans at worst case scenario. But what I'm saying is, this is a regime that wants to survive for another day. It's about its survival, and that includes the head, Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei. So push comes to shove, depending on the pressures you put on him, everything is on the table, including changing this eternal enmity with the United States. I don't think that's set in stone, because the Iranian regime has seen what's going on in their immediate neighborhood. You hear the slogans, Islamism and Islamic Republic and so forth, but they're not blind. They see how quickly Khalid Mashal left Damascus. They see how quickly Hamas turned its back on him. They see how other Arab so-called allies have been quick to shift gear. And I mean, all these factors might actually go in to change their minds, that they have been wrong, that it is about Iran's national interest as a country that should be first, not this sort of idea of some pan-Islamic euphoria that they've been pursuing for so long. I mean, that is the best case scenario if you're an Iranian reformist sitting in Tehran. That's what they want to see. Put the country's national interest first, forget about all these great, glorious, but vague regional ideas. Now, I wanted to get into the Arab Spring. Amir, stop me, because I think we have plenty of time, so I can talk about it later. Should I just stop here? You don't look angry enough,
No.
but I'll stop. I'll stop, just to play it safe.
Well, that's a good segue, actually, because speaking of the Arab Spring, let's put it in context what's happening in this region. all of the secular autocrats in the Gulf are pretty much gone. So Gaddafi, secular, gone. Mubarak, gone. Bashar al-Assad, still there, but becoming more and more irrelevant. And they're being replaced by people who are a little bit less secular. Not necessarily an Islamist government yet, but governments that are certainly more religious than the previous government that was overturned. And this is the policy space that the United States has to deal with. With that said, when you look at what the United States has to deal with from a perception standpoint, and you have a regime in Iran whose core ideology is rooted in anti-Americanism, in spite of the fact that there's a young population that's very pro-American, what is the United States to do so far as policy? And I'll start off with Ken again. And I think Alireza kind of pointed at this notion. Does the United States seek regime change in Iran, or does it simply want the regime to change its behavior?
Right.
And it'll take either one so long as it changes its behavior.
Yeah, I guess I'm a little. I don't see some sort of an innate genetic rival hatred between the United States and Iran. I think, yeah, I think there's a pragmatism. Let's remember we were allies when the Shah was in power. I think the enmity, the animosity has grown up from the hostage crisis in 79 to 81, to the hostage takings I was talking about, to the Hezbollah terrorism, to the early attempts to destabilize the Gulf regimes, which have now, since Khatami was there, that's been muted to a large extent. Now it's the nuclear program. So I think, if we can get some sort of settlement of the nuclear issue, I think a lot of this animosity of the past 30 years is going to start to fade. The United States has dealt with a lot of Islamic regimes. We deal with the government of Saudi Arabia. We have an alliance with the government of Saudi Arabia of 50, 60 years duration. When the Taliban were coming to power, we engaged them. We've engaged a lot of Islamic factions. There is not some U.S. innate genetic fear of Islamic regimes or Islamism. It's what some of these regimes have done, particularly the IRI, Islamic Republic of Iran. What they've done with Islamism has caused this perception that the U.S. is out to sort of stifle all Islamic parties, all Islamic regimes. But it's not really accurate. The U.S. is completely comfortable dealing with Islam, even Islamism, as long as it's recognizing U.S. strategic interests, that there is some pragmatism shown, that there can eventually be a deal with Israel on the whole Arab-Israeli dispute. The idea that the U.S. is fighting Islamic parties under every rock, I think, is really a misperception, and this even applies with let's remember when Ayatollah Khomeini came to power, the U.S. did not close our embassy immediately in Tehran. We didn't actually officially break relations till the hostage rescue mission, which was in April of 1980. The U.S. had talks with the new Khomeini regime. There was not some sort of oh my God, the world has collapsed, Khomeini. We didn't know what to make of Khomeini. Let's not forget when he first came in. So the same with the Taliban. There was not the sky is falling atmosphere. It was not till bin Laden got to Afghanistan. Then the Taliban became a big problem. Till then, we had engagement with the Taliban regime it was in Kandahar, actually. Mullah Omar, I don't think ever got to Kabul, but maybe once or twice. But so I think the issues have been strategic issues between the U.S. and the Islamic Republic of Iran. It's Iran's early vision of exporting the revolution. Now, as I've said, that wave has crested and subsided somewhat. And then the nuclear program. If we don't get a deal on the nuclear program, this animosity, this battle is going to continue and probably intensify. It may even come to a confrontation. If we do get a deal, which a lot of the Iranian clerics, the leadership seems to be preparing the groundwork that there may indeed be a deal. If we do get a deal that's verifiable and Iran lives up to its commitments, then I think we may see an era where the US and Iran are just sort of wary of each other, but there's no hostility, there's no confrontation, and the US continues to pursue, just to finish up on regime change versus behavior, I think the US would like to see an evolution in Iran. We're promoting civil society through open programs, not too much money, but some. The idea of changing the regime through covert action or military, overt US military action, I think is really off the table. Unless the green movement somehow lifts itself off the canvas and gets active again, I don't see the US doing much on regime change. It's only if the Iranian people rise up and give us that opportunity. I think, yes, any president will take advantage of that and will try to. Certainly the US would like to see a different regime, but in terms of a sustained campaign to bring about a new regime, I don't see it right now, unless, as I say, the green movement really gets much more active again, overtly.
No, Alex, we briefly spoke about this before. How do you think Iran sees itself in context of the Arab Spring? Mm-hmm. And how do you think the United States sees Iran in context of the Arab Spring? Because no doubt Iran is a major regional power. Some people say that it's not the fact that this regime is so capable and this strategic thinking machine or whatever, but the fact that it's located in a strategic location. It's a country 3.5 times the size of Texas, a population that's very educated. So that if you put anybody in charge there, they would do something with those resources. So how does Iran see itself as far as competition in the region in context of the Arab Spring?
You know, if I could just give you a quick anecdote, again, from this regional trip that I had. One of the things that was very clear to me was it doesn't really matter if you're sitting in Abu Dhabi or Doha or Riyadh, who is governing Tehran. The size of the place intimidates them. You can bring the Shah back, and their reservations about any Iranian government regime will not go away. It will lessen for sure. But I think you have to deal with Iran being what it is, product of its obviously history. And as we've all gotten to hear this one again from Arab officials, who said Iran has been Shia for 500 years, but Persian for 5,000 years. There is this issue that you have to deal with if you're United States strategic, analyst, and you have to think how do you incorporate your existing regional allies into the picture where Iran is sort of brought back in from the brink. Let me turn to the Arab Spring. Back in early part of last year when the Arab Spring happened, clearly Iran thought it was facing plenty of opportunities, and it did to some extent. Iran was most excited about what happened in Egypt. But what has happened over the last year is Iranian optimism is now been replaced by what you can say Iran is being put on the defensive. So let me give you a couple of examples. Bahrain is the one that comes to mind more than anything else. What did Iran actually do coming to this sort of rescue of the Bahraini Shia? Nothing. In actual fact, nothing. They did nothing. What have they really done in Syria? Now, I'm sure they've given support. I'm sure they've helped the Syrians on levels, on a tactical level, monitoring internet activities and so forth. That sort of stuff is happening. But did Iran really keep Assad in place? Is it Iran that keeps the Assad-Ba'athist regime in place? I doubt it. I doubt it very much. What happened in the interim, and this I think in many ways is Iran going from a position early on in the Arab Spring, we're saying the whole region is now open for Iranian expansionism. The whole place, from Tunisia to UAE, we can move in. That might have been true February of 2011, but Iran today is, let's keep the minimum. Let's keep as much as we can. as opposed to let's be expanding our influence, because they've realized they'll had a good hard look in the toolbox. They just don't have the instruments to be expanding. And I think, as I said earlier, things like Hamas realigning its policy has meant that the Iranians are having to sort of face the reality and realize they are far more isolated than they thought they were. So earlier I said they're good at filling the vacuum, which I think is true. But what happens when you go in and fill a vacuum is the relationships you establish don't have much depth. The only exception to my mind in the region is Hezbollah, where you can argue there is a lot of depth, and the Iraqi groups that have emerged in Baghdad. I mean, there is a lot of depth to Iranian Iraqi relations. I mean, Ken, I thought you're raising the issue of Latin America was very important. People talk about Iran having gone amok and is now, influencing and shaping events as far away as Latin America. There is no depth to Iran's influence in Latin America. Look what happened to Iranian-Brazilian relations. As soon as Lula was gone, there is no relations. What happens tomorrow? Hugo Chavez dies of his cancer. There is no relationship. So look for depth. Iran has depth to some extent in its immediate neighborhood, but not beyond. But Arab Spring really made it very clear to them, even the depth they thought they had with groups like Hamas and so forth wasn't there. That everybody's basically that pragmatic to look after their own interests, and so should Iran. I just wanted to say, I was taking what Ken said, because I read a lot of Farsi media as part of my job, and you talked about Islamist groups. It's very fascinating to hear the Iranian propaganda against AKP in Turkey. You talk about Turkey is not just seen as an Islamist run entity right now that the United States can live with, but in the eyes of the Iranians is actually the Trojan horse that is being pushed ahead by the United States to rearrange everything in the Middle East. So I think that we have to look at the nuances when we discuss Islamists. There is no one Islamist. There are many different shades to it, and you have to also look at national interests. One final thing, because I want to hear what Ali has to say as well. From day one, when Gaddafi was gone, and actually before he was gone, the big fear in Iran wasn't so much what would happen to their geopolitical interest, was whether the Arab Spring would travel all the way and end up replacing the regime in Tehran. How would that come about? In the sense of the repeating of the Libyan model. If they could do it in Libya, and if they repeat it, and that today is the fear about Syria, if they can replace Assad, implementing a similar situation as happened in Libya last year, why would the NATO, the United States, maybe with local allies like Turkey stop? Why wouldn't they repeat that in Iran? That has become the fear. So you've seen in the span of 365 days, Iran being extremely optimistic. We can go in, we can take advantage to Iran saying, let's just hang on to what we have, and worst case scenario, we could lose grip on power here. So far more defensive than a lot of people think the regime is.
So, of course, there's no genetic rivalry between Iran and the United States. But I would argue even that Iran and the United States are natural allies. But when we talk about Iran, Iran is one thing and the Islamic Republic is another thing. I mean, Iran is the nation state, it's the country we're talking about. The Islamic Republic is a political system, and it's not representative. So it doesn't really represent, arguably, Iran's national interests. And when we look at a figure like Khamenei or the Revolutionary Guards, they don't necessarily think about national interests first, because it's not a democratic country. And when Khamenei and his supporters basically state that Khamenei derives his authority from God, he's only answerable to God, he's not considering national interest necessarily, or the interests of the Iranian people. Specifically, he has his own individual political interests in mind. So for Khamenei comes first. And then he has to keep his supporters and constituents within the Revolutionary Guards and the system happy. So there is no rivalry between Iran and the United States, but there's a rivalry between Khamenei and the United States. And when we speak of the Arab Spring, yes, I really do agree with Alex that it has been a setback for Iran. It doesn't have as much support as it believed it had in the region. But this is what we see as analysts in Washington, D.C. I don't necessarily think that Khamenei and the Revolutionary Guards and the Basijis that run Iran see it that way. I mean, they're very consistent in their belief and approach that what has happened in the Islamic world, in the Arab world, is an Islamic awakening. They call it Islamic awakening, not Arab, Islamic, and that it has been inspired by Iran's Islamic Revolution. And although we can't analytically support this viewpoint, I think they really believe this. We can't underestimate their capacity to live under delusion. And when you're Khamenei, when your supporters are telling you that you derive your authority from God, when they take pictures of you so there's a halo around your head and you appear divine, the guy is not necessarily well informed. He's not worldly. He doesn't read various media sources. Yes, we read Farsi media. I very much doubt he reads English media. And he has people like the editor of Kehan advising him. So you do actually have a regime here that thinks that the United States is in decline in the Middle East. And they make this argument. They really believe in it. So I don't think we should underestimate Iran's capacity or its leadership capacity for being delusional and making a lot of mistakes. And if you look at Khamenei and the Revolutionary Guards in the last few years, and Ahmadinejad, they've consistently made mistake after mistake after mistake in their domestic politics, in their administration of the economy, in their pursuit of the nuclear program. Even though I would argue the nuclear program is in a lot of ways destroying Iran as a country. It's destroying its economy. It's damaging its society. It's destroying the bonds between people. It's making the country more autocratic. Khamenei is not stepping back from the nuclear program because he sees it as in his own interests. He sees it as assuring his own survival. When he's under a lot of pressure, yes, he'll behave in a way that indicates he might be open to compromise. But ultimately, this is a man that's 73 years old, that was tortured in the Shah's jails, who has a very specific viewpoint of Iran that is anti-modern, and he's not going to change anytime soon. As long as Khamenei is alive, as long as his supporters rule Iran, you're not going to have any sort of rapprochement or strategic cooperation.
Could I just quickly follow up on that, if I may? No, I agree. There is a lot of delusion going on. But you don't get to run a country like Iran for 23 years by being delusional all the time. Khamenei was a nobody when he was turned into a supreme leader. Now, he was a symbolic president, but he didn't have the qualifications to become a Vali Fari. He did, and he survived. And in the meantime, he's taken care of almost all his opponents on the stage that faced him, starting with Rafsanjani, Mohammad Khatami, and now he's taking care of Ahmadinejad, who's effectively neutralized. My point is, delusional, that doesn't mean this guy's suicidal crazy. And I don't see anybody out there in the region doing crazy things in the name of Iran. Now, where are they? What's their support? I mean, why don't we even hear from the Saudis anymore about what Iran is specifically doing in Bahrain? Because they're not doing anything specifically. In terms of arming and training and all the rest of it, that they could do and did back in the 80s and so forth. So I think, yes, delusional is one thing. Miscalculating is a different thing. They miscalculate because, as you said, they don't know the world. I mean, in my mind, one of the biggest miscalculations that they have done, and that happened on the watch of Ahmadinejad, was this idea of coming out there and picking up a fight with the Israelis on a whole new level, denying the Holocaust and so forth. I mean, what was that about from Iran's national interest? What was that about? Does Ahmadinejad talk along those lines anymore? No. He learned the lesson. If you want to, become friendly with the United States, that's not what you start off with, talking about the fact that the Holocaust might not have happened. So they've learned, they miscalculate. But miscalculation is different from being delusional. And I'll tell you one thing that Khamenei cannot afford. This man's biggest miscalculation was his support for Mahmoud Ahmadinejad in 2005. Supporting Ahmadinejad the way he did has come to get him, and is still effectively trying to bring this era to an end. But his miscalculation created a lot of enemies within the regime. Just listen to the chatter, even within the ranks of the IRGC, which is not a united entity. They saying to Khamenei, listen, that was a big mistake you made about Ahmadinejad, but can Khamenei afford another big mistake? So he might really think that this nuclear issue is his red line, and he's publicly had his people come out and say that is the case, as lately as this week. But when the pressure is on, when everybody in the regime is coming to him, what's left of the regime, by the way, coming to him saying, listen, these sanctions are going to get worse by the end of this year. Prices have gone up to an extent that we haven't seen since the early 80s. He is not going to be delusional, and he knows about his miscalculations. He might just shift gear. The key here is, can the United States grab his hand and help him on that path, or they're going to be in his way and say, you know what, we're not going to give you any options. We want your head. And I don't think the United States made up its mind on that one.
I also like the miscalculation. I think Khamenei completely miscalculated the degree to which countries were going to cooperate with the U.S. sanctions. I think his early rhetoric, the demeanor was that we're going to power through this, we're going to muddle through, these sanctions are not going to affect us that much, they're never going to enact sanctions that are going to affect our oil exports. Countries in the region are never going to cooperate. UAE is not going to cooperate. India is not going to cooperate. Kuwait and Turkey. And I think they have been floored in the past 4 months since the EU oil embargo decision of January 23. I think they've been floored at the degree to which there's been international cooperation on these sanctions, to the degree which I think the 30% reduction in their oil revenue is about right. I think they were exporting about 2.3 million barrels a day. Now it's maybe 1.6 or 7, and it's going lower once July 1 comes, which is why I think Saeed Jalili, in the first day of talks in the evening with Ms. Ashton, the EU special representative, all he talked about was, we want the EU oil embargo not implemented. And then tomorrow, Saturday, we'll get to the other stuff, but can you guarantee me this? And of course, she didn't guarantee him that, but you better believe in Baghdad on May 23rd, this is going to be an Iranian full court press to say, okay, if we sign with you on stopping 20% enrichment, we want that EU oil embargo not going into effect July 1. Iran is going to absolutely demand this. I don't think they'll get it, and then we see where it goes. But I think they've completely miscalculated, and the Supreme Leader is now, I think, starting, maybe. I totally agree. Hard to change him. He's fixed in his ways. Very hard line. Very much believes in steadfastness, and but I think enough of his advisors are now telling him of the threat if he doesn't adjust, that maybe he's starting to get the message, maybe.
Thank you, House.
Can I address the question of what U.S. foreign policy should be regarding regime change? I don't think the U.S. should adopt a formal policy of regime change, and I don't think the United States will adopt that policy for a number of reasons. One, regime change being very controversial because of what happened in Iraq. And I don't think the United States has really the capability of changing the Iranian regime. But I think we're at a point where we have a lot of opportunities, and the U.S. foreign policy toward Iran has a number of opportunities. Like Ken said, I think the regime has been surprised that sanctions have been so effective, and a lot of countries have basically jumped on the wagon, and they're pressuring Iran to stop its nuclear program. But the question is, even if the regime decides to stop enrichment at a certain level, whether that should be the ultimate U.S. objective, and I argue no. Our primary objective should be to dissuade Iran from weaponizing its program. But in reality, I think we should also pursue a policy of containment. So given the trends in the region, given the trends in Iran, I think we can effectively contain the Islamic Republic's power. We can contain it and even roll it back, and this is already happening in the region to some extent. And sanctions not only apply pressure against the regime in terms of the nuclear program, they also weaken the regime. They impact the regime's ability to project power in the region. And even if our formal policy is not a regime change, we're doing a lot of things to undermine the regime. And the regime really believes this, and they should. We're doing things intentionally or unintentionally to undermine the Iranian regime. Sanctions being the main one. Unfortunately, sanctions also hurts the Iranian population. It is a blunt tool, but it has given us the opportunity to effectively contain the regime and hope that something better emerges in Iran. And we've seen democratic forces in Iran come into the streets in 2009. The Arab Spring, or the uprisings, you can argue, actually may have been inspired by Iran's own democratic movement in 2009. Ultimately, it wasn't successful for a number of reasons, I think, namely the lack of leadership and ultimate objectives. But there are these trends within Iran. So if we're able to contain the Islamic Republic, roll back its power, then we can have some hope, having stopped Iran's nuclear program, that a better, more democratic political system can emerge in time. Because in reality, even if, like I said, the May talks produce some sort of compromise, the issue is still the Islamic Republic. That issue is not going to go away. We have many issues with the Islamic Republic: its support of terrorism, its opposition to Israel, its abysmal human rights record. So the nuclear program is just one part of it. It's not the focus, and it should not be the focus.
Now,
Can I just respond?
Yeah,
From the perspective of, obviously I work for the Congress, but I agree with you. We have this broad agenda to work on, but pragmatically, when you're looking at continued trillion-dollar deficits in the United States, complete war weariness over Iraq and Afghanistan, the process of getting out of Afghanistan and leaving that whole, if there's a nuclear deal, the idea that the U.S. is going to keep striving to and somehow confront Iran until it capitulates, I really don't think that's the way things are going to go. I think we might like it to, as academics and experts who want a better Iran, but I think pragmatically it's just not going to happen.
But don't you think it's going there already? We're already going in that direction.
Slow, really slow. Yeah.
not real quick. If you look at the Zogby surveys commissioned by PAAIA, it's actually very fascinating. It shows where the Iranian American community stands on a wide variety of issues, and also U.S. policy. And recently we did a poll on assessing Iranian American community's attitudes on a potential military strike on Iran. And 2/3 of Iranian Americans did not support potential military action against Iran. However, if you go back to the previous poll that was much broader, the poll indicated that the vast majority of Iranian Americans prefer a secular democratic Iran. Only 2% support the current government.
Right.
And more interestingly, about 4% prefer a reformed Islamic Republic. So as far as the Iranian Americans go, you have a situation where they believe that the military strike is not in the interest of the United States economically or politically. They have family in the region, but they still prefer the Islamic Republic to change. So can you comment on that so far as U.S. policy goes? There's been a lot of talk about military strike, not anymore, but if you go back to March, there was a lot of talk in the air, particularly on the news, about prospect of a military strike on Iran from the United States or Israel, and that certainly died down. But what are the U.S. options out there? And Ken was briefly talking about that the United States is certainly constrained. We're drawing down from 2 wars. We have a massive deficit. So in this policy space where our options are limited, what is the United States to do?
I just throw a quick comment out there on that issue. In the way I look at it, is one of the key strategic cards that the U.S. does have vis-a-vis Iran is actually the anti-regime sentiments of majority of the Iranian people. That's clearly there, and we've seen that time and time again. What we also have seen is this is a country where I would argue a crude sort of almost 19th century-like sense of nationalism, which isn't unique to Iran, you find it in many places, runs very deep in the country. So it takes almost nothing for this regime to be able to utilize that existing Iranian nationalism. So in other words, this is a strategic card. The United States can turn Iranian nationalism against the regime, i.e. making it very clear to the people that, listen, the country's policies as are being drafted and implemented by Khamenei are not to the benefit of this country. You got to make that clear, help that, facilitate that, become much more apparent than is the case today. To give you an example, to this day, nobody really knows the cost of this nuclear program. Nobody knows how much it's cost this country to go ahead with this nuclear program. So you can help bring that about. But one thing is very clear. The nuclear issue doesn't galvanize the Iranian people in Iran or over here. I don't see it. I might be wrong on this, but I don't see how the nuclear issue alone is going to be enough to help the United States go ahead against head-to-head with the regime. It has to involve things like human rights, and it has to involve things like human rights on a much stronger sort of manner than we've seen so far. I mean, the U.S. has done amazingly well, I think, in the last few years, but it has to do more so. And that, again, complicates and brings the U.S. back to that sort of square one. What do we want? Regime change or change in regime behavior? Because human rights, if you stretch it enough, can only mean one thing: regime change, the end of the Islamic Republic. So, I mean, that's the dilemma. And I think, as I said before, I don't think the administration now or the Bush administration knew what it really wanted. But it's certainly moved in the direction of settling for change in regime's behavior because of some of the realities that Ken just outlined.
So you feel the administration and Congress would be as active on Iran if the nuclear issue was settled? Let's say the day after it was settled. The U.S. and Congress would be as active on Iran as they are now?
I mean, I can see immediately if the Iranians maintain their position, particularly specifically on Israel. In some ways, you can argue that it would make it difficult for Congress, at least. White House is different. The Congress is going to have a tough time to suddenly change its entire game vis-a-vis the Iranian regime.
Okay, well, I think if there's a deal, I think people in this town are going to move on to the next crisis. It could be Kim Jong-un, it could be China, I don't know what it is. But if there's a deal, I differ. I think people are going to be moving on really quick.
So let's open up to questions for the panel. Eric, and then Amir.
I don't know if I need that. I'm pretty loud. Okay, blow everybody's ears out. Alireza mentioned the P5+1 talks in Istanbul, and then there's been more talks that are scheduled at the end of May in Baghdad. And in this interim, President Obama's issued 2 executive orders imposing new sanctions against both Syria and Iran. My question for you guys is this to appease critics of diplomacy here? Is this to increase leverage going into the talks in Baghdad? Or is this merely symbolic? Because if you look at those sanctions programs, the latest one, no one was designated under it. It was just giving this authority to the Treasury. And the previous set of sanctions targeted people that were already designated under other U.S. sanctions programs. So I'd like to hear the speaker's thoughts on that.
Ken?
Yeah, you're talking about the electronic curtain designations that were,
that was a few weeks ago, and then just a couple of days, the foreign invaders sanctions.
Which is effectively sanctioning those who break the sanctions that are in place.
Exactly. Sanctioning sanctions.
Yeah, I think, the electronic curtain issue is sort of linked to Obama's Nowruz speech and some other trends. SASADA law of 2010 gave authority to loosen up U.S. export regulations, to give software to Iranians to evade the regime's suppression activities. I think it's somewhat symbolic, but it is in this trend of a slow support for civil society in Iran. I think the programs we have in place now may pay off 10, 20 years from now. They're not a regime change strategy by any means. That would require much more activity and resources. It's a slow process designed to work many years in the future, and it might work.
Amir?
Do I need it, do you think? Is it okay to talk just like this, much more normal? First of all, I'm jealous of how your English is good. I wish I could come here, Alex, when I was 10. Not there. And by the way, thank you. I guess there was a lot of great points, but I guess missing one really important point. It's about the role of Russia. Just recently we realized that our lovely supreme leader, Khamenei, is graduated from the People's Friendship University of Russia, or Patrice Lumumba University, or it's better to say the official university of the KGB. And from 1964 to 1974, no one can find exactly where was the supreme leader. And it's totally dark in his biography, and you cannot find anything about it. And the Russian government, by accident, released the package on their TV, Russia Today, that the Khamenei is graduated from that school. Okay, and what's the mission of the university, this university, the Patrice Lumumba University? The dean of school mentioned 2010, during the 50th anniversary of the school, the mission of the school was to train a global elite of leaders, something like this, and look at all the graduated students from the school. It's a lot of lovely people, Yasser Arafat, and the supreme leader of Iran, and Carlos
Carlos the
the
Jackal.
The Jackal.
Carlos the Jackal.
Yeah. And Hugo Chavez, and you can find a lot of great visiting lecturer like the Fidel Castro, and the Memar Ghazafi was there, graduated from there, and Bashar Assad graduated from there too. And it's a lot of leaders from those areas. That means exactly that Russia wanted to have some influence in his area. And the point is, why we are looking to see some change in Khamenei's behavior. It's not possible, definitely, because he has some secret that the Russian government, they know that secret. It's the, I know this is the right term, the skeleton at the closet. And
Skeleton.
yeah, and definitely Khamenei cannot move forward to shake hand of the United States, because the Russian government doesn't want him to do that. And totally the United States should forget about seeing some change in Khamenei's behavior, or after Khamenei, maybe Mustafa Khamenei or everybody else, they were waiting to see the Khamenei is dead, and then after Khamenei came Khamenei was worse. And I guess we should just look at that point, and then have the real policy in the United States to not go to see some change in behavior, because changing behavior means seeing some change at the supreme leader. It's the only power, it's the god of Iran right now. And the United States should just look at the benefit of the Iranian people and the American people, and just forget about the government. I wanted to know your
You go ahead.
Well, it's, I've heard this before, and I saw that package by Russia Today. I looked into it. To be honest with you, the idea of Khamenei as a Russian asset is quite appealing, because you might be able to solve this whole thing by just reaching out to the Kremlin and forget all about Iran. But I've also seen speculation about that it was a mistake on their part, that it was Ayatollah Khomeini that was in Russia. I don't know. I just don't know enough about it to comment on it. But I think on the issue of Russia, you do raise a very interesting issue. Which is, again, Ali mentioned this. What is it that Khamenei is doing? Is it his interest, stay in power, and sacrifice Iran's long-term interest for the sake of his own very narrow, limited personal interest in staying in power? I think there we can have a debate. And Russia is a good case that has, all this time, while this nuclear program has been going ahead, promised to be on the side of the Iranians. And each time where it has, again, push come to shoves, at the UN Security Council, 4 times they voted for sanctions against Iran. The same is true for the Chinese. So what I'm trying to say is, have a hard look at your so-called friends. How friendly are they to you? Russia benefits from Iran being isolated, has benefited for 20 years. All those pipelines that could have gone from Central Asia and Caucasus through Iran went, some of them are actually There's a debate about having a pipeline go through from Turkmenistan through Afghanistan to Pakistan. That's how badly they're trying to keep Iran out of the game. These are things that could have been different had Khamenei not had the sort of antagonistic set of relations with the United States. There, I think we have a real debate. And that's what I was talking about. Turn the table, use Iranian nationalism and say, these people are hurting Iran. They claim to defend Iran, Mihan and all the rest of it. But really, they're the ones who are undermining Iran. And the damage they're causing right now, we have to live with for decades to come.
No, I mean, I would just completely echo that. I mean, what Iran could be had it gone a different direction in '79 from what it is now, which is an isolated, criticized, and I think this is what's caused some change in Tehran, is the degree to which the Iranian people are seeing corporations pull out. I mean, you've got car make, Toyota, Hyundai, you know,
Exactly.
everybody, Tata Motors, even of India, has pulled out. I mean, even Chinese companies that have agreed to invest are either not going forward, or the degree to which the world is just completely dissing. You know, I think it's had a major effect. But you know, that may, in the end, as Alireza says, may not get the supreme leader to sign anything. That's absolutely true.
PAAIA.
Not to oversimplify your topic.
You want to speak into the mic? I can't.
I have a face for radio, not a voice for radio. Given your gentleman's optic into this tactical, strategic, and congressional, you mentioned certain vacuums that Iran fills, like these verticals. Are there attributes studied on these verticals to proactively plan for it, whether it be on a tactical level, strategic, or congressional? You mentioned Egypt. Egypt's obviously still stirring a bit, so let's say Venezuela and Chavez. You have Iranian interest, you also have U.S. interest, and in a vacuum that could be filled either with Cuba or Iran in unison, or the U.S. maybe could play a role in this regime change. How would you study those vacuums and verticals from an attribute, and how could you then strategically, tactically, and from a congressional standpoint plan for it?
One vacuum is Syria. Potentially, if Bashar al-Assad falls, that's a big blow to Iran. And a lot of people in this town and in the Middle East are interested in Bashar al-Assad falling for that very same reason. Of course, there are a number of other complications in terms of who succeeds Bashar al-Assad, whether it's the Muslim Brotherhood, there are al-Qaeda elements in Syria. So it's not so black and white. In terms of, I think, Amir, you mentioned what U.S. policy should be toward Iran given the Arab Spring. I think the United States has woken up to the fact that, or I hope it has, that we can't necessarily pursue business as usual. Yes, we've relied on authoritarian governments in the Arab world, but there are new elites emerging in these specific countries. For example, take Egypt. The Muslim Brotherhood is trying to amass power in that country. I'm not saying that we should support or not support the Muslim Brotherhood per se, but the reality is the Muslim Brotherhood could play a major role in Egypt in the future and other Islamist parties. So we'll have to engage them, we'll have to deal with them. When it comes to the Middle East, I think we have to reconsider whether we should seriously pursue democratization. And up to this point, we haven't pursued it as seriously as we should have, perhaps. Because if we pursue democratization across the Middle East, I think this makes our policy more consistent and legitimate and valid. If we pursue democracy in Egypt, eventually we'll have to pursue it in other countries, including Iran. And I think that should be the long-term U.S. objective, democracy in Iran. And you mentioned that there is a war wariness in this country, and I agree with that. But when it comes to Iran, the United States doesn't have to go to war against Iran to achieve its objectives. I think actually the use of the U.S. military would counter those objectives. So I think there's enough room to actually counter Iran in many different fronts, not just a nuclear program, but its power in the region, influencing the regime's behavior at home to some extent, and also facilitating democratization in Iran. we don't have to spend hundreds of billions of dollars. We've already, to some extent, have Iran where we want them. And I don't want to be over-optimistic, but I do see the regime as being deeply vulnerable. So even if we reach a nuclear deal with Iran, you argue that the issue will go away. I don't think the issue will go away because we have issues like Syria at stake, and it is in U.S. interest for the Islamic Republic's influence in the region to fade. And that's where we fill those vacuums in countries like Syria and the rest of the Middle East.
No, I'm saying the intensity, I think. It's no accident. I mean, there's been, we're on the rec, I can't really, well, it's been introduced, okay. There's legislation that was moving. It was moving rapidly. I can talk about legislation that's been introduced. I can't talk about moving, fast track. Then talks in Istanbul, second round. Where is this dead engines, dead astern, dead stop? And if there's a deal, I'm telling you, they're going to move on. They're not going to put it away. They're not going to put it on a shelf.
That's a big if there is a deal.
Well, okay.
Can I quickly? I don't know if.
Okay, so hold on. Well, what if there isn't a deal?
Oh, then it all gins up again. Then I would say if the talks collapse, I think we are on a march toward a confrontation. Absolutely on a march toward confrontation.
Yeah, if there's no deal, I think the chances of Israel striking Iran militarily increase, although I don't think that's inevitable given the debate in Israel. I think the chances of miscalculation on all sides increase in terms of military confrontation in the Persian Gulf. Even if it's accidental, the chances increase. The chances of war against Iran increase. But I think then the U.S. has to make the key commitment and decision not to pursue a military option, but to create a containment regime against the Islamic Republic until something better replaces it.
Alex, and then one last question.
Two quick points, if I may. Look, if you look at the region, nobody wants war. Iran doesn't want war. U.S. doesn't want war. Really, no. There are exceptions, maybe the GCC states, but they only sign up to war that's limited in terms of their strikes. They don't necessarily want regime change for two reasons. Regime change could be a new precedent for regime change elsewhere in the region. If you're sitting in Riyadh, you don't like the idea of regime change going amok across the region. And the other thing is spillover impact. I mean, the conflict in Iran is not going to be one big black hole. What happens in Iran will have a spillover effect on the region. So that complicates how the neighboring states look at it. But the fact is nobody really wants war, and I mean, including Israel. But the other thing tying into the issue of Israel, say that negotiations fail, not just in Baghdad, but subsequent negotiations, but in a year or two, they totally fail.
No, won't get that.
Won't get that far.
Won't get that far.
Well, it's been going on since
Has
2002. But you're right. We're getting
by
to the
September, October. Yeah.
Exactly, and I think the Iranians know that the pressure is on. But let's just say, for the sake of argument, to have a war game scenario here, Israel strikes. What happens to the Muslim Brotherhoods? All these opening sort of fronts that we have right now. I mean, these are the big unknowns. And if I'm sitting, again, from Washington looking at it, I will say, let's go with containment. Let's keep war out, because the unintended consequences in terms of creating new realignments in the region, putting Muslim Brotherhood into the arms of the Iranians and so forth. There are so many of these great questions out there. And for a region that's strategically so vital, simply because of energy, but other issues, it's just too much of a risk. So anyway, let me...
The Israelis are not going to let it, they're not going to let the Israelis have essentially arrested the idea of containing Iran. They've said either this program is going to be halted or else. And we know what the or else is.
But do they have the capacity to disable it?
They have the capacity to get us to disable it.
Right, okay, if they're successful to bring the U.S. into the war, that's different.
Yeah, David, and then this gentleman.
Yes, I have two questions. The first one is, what do we need to see out of Baghdad in order to keep arresting and halting the march forward towards war or further confrontation? Is it the 20% fuel swap? Is that the minimum we need in order to continue down the path? Or is it something else? And as a follow-up question, what do we need in order to see what sort of agreement would we need to see on the opposite side, where we can move forward in a sufficient way in order to see Congress lift sanctions on the central bank? The president has very limited authority to suspend sanctions on the central bank.
He
for a
can waive,
120-day period,
he can exercise waivers fully.
but only for a 120-day period.
But then it's renewable indefinitely, though.
It is, but it does create a lot of economic uncertainty, and with the election, a double uncertainty that would undermine the president in talks. So, what would it take in order to see Congress move and actually lift sanctions?
No comment.
So just to address your question, there's an article in the Los Angeles Times citing, I believe, anonymous administration officials saying that the U.S. would accept limited Iranian uranium enrichment. That's a possibility that Iran agrees to enrich uranium up to 5%, perhaps using limited amount of centrifuges, perhaps not using the underground Fordo facility, which is less vulnerable to military attacks, and that it would also agree to ship out the 20% enriched uranium, because the highly enriched uranium could be used for nuclear weapons. If it takes those steps, I think there is a chance that the U.S., the P5+1, and even Israel, if you listen to Ehud Barak, he's made comments suggesting as much, even if Israel would be amenable to that sort of deal. But and Iran has said, when we sit in Baghdad, we're going to solve the nuclear issue as soon as possible. We're going to basically make decisions that wipe the nuclear issue away, which is a made-up issue, they claim. So I think it is possible for Iran to make some sort of initial compromises to buy time. Because right now, we're not going to just solve the nuclear issue just like that. I mean, it's going to take years and years, most likely. But I think what we can do, Iran and the United States, is in the interest of both parties to buy time. For Iran to avoid the embargo and potentially war, and for the United States to avoid war, because the United States doesn't want war. We have an election coming up. So if both sides can buy enough time, a few months at this point, that's a possibility. I think there's still a chance of that. But then we bought, let's say, 6 months. Then we have to look at what the next 6 months produces, and 6 months after that. Because when you look at the Iranian nuclear program, this issue has been going on since 2003. And I think there's an expectation in the United States, because we're so eager, and in some ways, I think, eager to resolve the issue, that right now we need time. I don't think there's an expectation that we're going to solve the issue. So I think the need to buy time, and all parties' interest in buying time, even in Israel, is very important.
Last question.
Can I just add on the Congress doesn't really, the administration has tremendous discretion over, in any sanctions law that you look at, the administration has tremendous discretion over implementation. So it may not come to Congress having to roll back anything necessarily.
Ray Fakori. Last week, Senator Rubio was speaking about the Iranian situation right now, and he was saying that that if talks do not go well, that attack is very likely. In the event of an attack, how would that strengthen relations with Venezuela, or these shallow relationships? Would it strengthen them, making them more deeper, as you were saying, or would it kind of push them away from the world perspective, with people backing away from their relations with Iran?
I mean, that to some extent, that's the unknown. And you can say great unknown. Imagine strikes. Somebody in Tehran picks up the phone and says to their local allies in South Beirut, you know what, we want you to start firing those Katyushas and every other missile we've been giving you, and they got, 10,000 or so, hit Israel. And in response comes, we can't. We don't have the base here in Lebanon to do it. Things have moved on. We're not a rogue entity anymore. We're part of the establishment. Same true for Hamas and others. So I think that's a great unknown. Nobody knows how Iran's proxies in the region would react. And I mean, that's even less clear when you go far away as Venezuela and so on. I don't think anybody's out there is going to sort of die for Iran. or for the sake of solidarity with the regime. So I think the Iranian regime clearly knows that, has learned the lesson because of this nuclear sort of stalemate for 10 years. All these sanctions that have been imposed on, as Ken was saying, how surprised they are. The squeeze is on, and the partners that Iran thought were their partners are actually partners of the West in this endeavor. You know, when you give the ultimatum to China or Russia or in a country out there, choose between Iran and the United States, it's really difficult. You put them in a very difficult position, and that's what Iran's paying the price for. And hopefully, at some point, even Khamenei's eye is going to open up to this reality.
Thank you for attending the panel, Dr. Katzman, Alireza, Alex. We have a small token of our appreciation for you.
Wow. That's unusual in D.C.
Yes, we do. And it's basically.
Thank you very much.
So on behalf of PAAIA, we'd like to give you
Wow.
this small token of our appreciation. The picture of the Sire cylinder, Declaration of Human Rights.
That's great.
That's wonderful.
And from PAAIA. Thank you very
Thank you.
much.
Thank you.
Thanks. This is great. Thank you.
This is wonderful.
I appreciate it.
Again, thank you so much. Thank you so much for attending.